Welcome to Outlaw Theology with the Whiskey Preacher. I'm your host, Phil Shepard, better known as the Whiskey Preacher. This is a very special vidcast for myself because this is the inaugural vidcast from my sabbatical. I've been out of commission for almost 6 months now, and technically I'm still on sabbatical for the next 3 or 4 months. However, I've really been itching to write articles and create vidcasts. And so here I am. This is my first vidcast back, and I thought it was very appropriate to review my good friend's new novel, Blood Doctrine by Christian Piatt. The name of this vidcast is The Unknown Namesake, a bastard's divine legacy. It covers Christian's new novel, which is called Blood Doctrine. Without being a spoiler, is about this. They have been able to figure out a way to clone Jesus' DNA from artifacts that are found from his crucifixion into the 21st century, which I find fascinating. I really hope that you will take the time to read this book and that you will take the next few minutes and hear my interview that I had with Christian about this fantastic novel. I will remind you all that it is a novel. It's a fictional work. Even though that there are some historical accuracies that are surrounding the novel, it's still just fictional work, which really excites me because I recently got into these conversations about how people take blindly from the pulpit whatever their pastor says about Jesus and the resurrection and the second coming and all of that goodness. The Epistle of Barnabas suggests that Jesus was not crucified. Instead, Judas was crucified in his stead, and Jesus then was ascended into heaven. And that's created a real big uproar for some folks because it challenges their idea of who and what Jesus did. And even though Blood Doctrine is, again, a fictional work, it challenges the ideas of what has been taught from our evangelical pulpits for many, many years. I once was asked a handful of years ago, did I think Jesus was married? And my response was, yes, I do. And then puzzled, they said, well, doesn't that change everything for you? And I said, actually, no, it doesn't. Because if Jesus was married, which I think that there's a good case to say that he was, and possibly to Mary Magdalene, I think she's gotten a bad rap in church history being labeled as a prostitute. But if she was his wife, and yes, if they did bear children, that doesn't change anything for me. And this is the reason why. Is after being in love myself and being in love with your soulmate and then being asked to give up everything that you are to be hung on the cross as a criminal is that much more powerful to me. He still chose to do those actions even though he had a family. It doesn't bother me to think that he may have had a wife. In fact, it would have been really weird. We like to put our 21st century lenses on a first century conversation. But what we don't realize is that he being Jesus, was referred to as rabbi and was respected amongst many religious leaders. And at the time, if you were going to be respected as a religious leader, you weren't single. You weren't not only single, but you had a wife and children. And so it is more unlikely, in my humble opinion, which I respect, by the way, that Jesus was not married than it was that he was married. And like this fictional book plays with the idea of Jesus' DNA being extracted from one of the crucifixion relics and created a new Messiah. People who were looking for something more than Jesus. I don't want to spoil the book for you, but it has you from the very beginning, the idea that God is bigger than the pulpits of the churches that we are at or serve in, and Jesus is bigger, dare I say, than even the Bible. That Scripture should point to Jesus, not be our God. I had the opportunity to interview Christian Piatt, who's the author of Blood Doctrine, about his thought process about writing Blood Doctrine. I got to ask him questions whether he believed in a literal resurrection, or whether he believed Jesus was married or not. Or how much does that even change the story if he was married and if he had children? Without further ado, please sit back, relax, enjoy the interview. I would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave a comment in the section below here in the comment section. Hit me up on Twitter at Phil Shepherd. Hit me up on Facebook or Christian at Facebook. Christian's Facebook page is Christian Piatt Author. Mine is Whiskey Preacher. And hashtag the hell out of this, because I think this is a conversation that needs to be had and continue to be had throughout as we grow as a larger and global faith community. Thanks again for popping by Outlaw Theology. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to hearing from you. And my guest today is the author of the yet to be controversial, but heading that way, Blood Doctrine, Christian Piatt. Thanks for coming on here, Christian.
Thanks for having me on. We're making this a habit, dude.
I know, man. I'm enjoying it. I love having you on here. And as I was telling you right before we started this is kind of my inaugural video back since being on my sabbatical. And I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to have the chance, to read this book and to give a review about it. So thanks for giving me the opportunity for both.
Absolutely. Happy to come on anytime, man.
Doctrine. Let's just jump right into this. This is your novel that you've self-published through Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about Blood Doctrine. Where did that idea come from? Mm-hmm. And what is it a little bit about for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet?
Yeah, back in around 06 or 07, there were some stories coming out that all kind of converged for me. I'm sure people remember the Dolly the sheep, where they're cloning sheep and all that kind of stuff. And then there was the story around that same time about what people called the James ossuary, which was this stone sarcophagus found in the Middle East that seemed to be dated around the time of Jesus, and it said on it, James, brother of Jesus. And so people were suspecting there might be organic material inside, remains or whatever, that could possibly be connected to Jesus. And then around that same time, there was a date palm seed that was discovered in Egypt, and they were able to cultivate it into, through some genetic manipulation, into growing a viable plant of this ancient variety. It was 2,000 years old. And so I started putting A and B and C together, basically, and saying, hey, there are all these theories and conspiracies about remains of the cross, and of course the Shroud of Turin and all these things. What if one of them had enough genetic material preserved in it to where the genetic capabilities that we now have could be used to in vitro fertilize an egg and actually use a surrogate to bring Jesus back to life? And of course, it's by an apocalyptic fringe group, just to make it interesting, that is looking to invoke the end times on their terms, basically.
It's been fascinating to read, especially since just being over in the Holy Land a couple months ago. The way you describe the terrain and the way you describe how people interact, especially within the Qumran community. And for those of you who don't know, Qumran is the community where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I want to say 48?
It was around that time, around the World War II era,
Yeah, and a shepherd boy had supposedly lost a sheep and went looking for him, stumbled over some jars, and they found many caves with ancient documents in them, and they call them the Dead Sea Scrolls. And part of your story takes place surrounding this community, in which I found fascinating because we don't necessarily historically know tons about this community, except that they sequestered themselves from other religious communities, that there had been rumors that John the Baptist may have been a part of their community, and of recent, and what I mean recent, the last 10-15 years, there had been speculation that Jesus himself may have spent some time with that community as well. Right. And you've taken that story and really dove into that idea more with the characters that you've written about. Tell me a little bit why you chose Qumran. Why did you choose the Dead Sea Scrolls to make that a center part of your novel? And by the way, before we go any farther, just before people start getting upset, or if you want to get upset, that's fine. This is a fictional book, people.
That's right.
I'm not saying that some of this stuff hasn't happened. I'm a fan of a good conspiracy any day of the week. However, yes, I do believe Elvis was alive after he died, but did they recreate Jesus from a DNA sample? No, I don't buy that. But that's just a side note.
Yeah, and really the idea isn't so much that this actually happened. Like, that was the big buzz with Da Vinci Code, which was, did all this actually happen? Well, I think it's pretty clear from the book that I'm not trying to suppose that it has happened. What I tried to do is create the sense of plausibility that it could happen. So I tried to be really thorough in my research of the area. I've always been fascinated with the caves of Qumran and the Essene monks, the monastic community that live there. And really, there are three threads of this story, and one of them follows sort of this ancient biblical narrative. And it actually doesn't follow Jesus, because some people assume that it would. It actually starts with the crucifixion, and then follows from there to Qumran, where Mary Magdalene and some of Jesus' family actually start to learn where he was, what he was doing during some of these missing years. The reason that I originally kind of caught on to that idea of Qumran and the Essenes, aside from the connection with John the Baptist and everything, is that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found there and preserved in the clay jars there, and I believe there have been there's been other organic material found in those caves because it's just very dry, very cool, and they sit undisturbed for so long. So that does play into the preservation of said genetic material. And of course, to find out exactly how that plays out, you got to read the book.
Of course, of course. And what I also find fascinating is that, again, just from being over there, how close Qumran is to the Dead Sea, and how they have found things that, and they're still looking within the Dead Sea, how well things have been preserved because of the Dead Sea.
Right.
And it literally is on the coastline of the Dead Sea, and the idea of such DNA or even things being preserved for such a long time, it is plausible. I like that idea that it is plausible. I also, fast forwarding a little bit into the book, you also, a part of it takes place in ancient Palestine and Israel, and then part of it takes place in modern day Colorado, and especially the Golden area. And for somebody who's driven through that area a lot, I just find it fascinating that you have these parallel stories going on, that the climates are very similar, the terrain is very similar. Was that intentional on your part, or have you ever been to the Holy Land at all, per se, or?
I haven't, but I did live in Golden, so it's close. But yeah, there's this sort of cohesive parallel, I think, between the hillsides overlooking the valley in which Golden, Colorado is in, and overlooking Denver, and the Qumran cliffs, where the caves were, where the Essenes dwelled, overlooking the Dead Sea. So yeah, there is some kind of a tie there, and I was trying to create a feel of continuity, of course, through the book, even though it jumps thousands of years and thousands of miles back and forth.
So the $1 million question is this. You allude to the fact, and I'm not ruining this for the readers, but you allude to the fact that after Jesus' crucifixion, or Yeshua as his family refers him to throughout the past narrative, he comes back and reveals himself to various different peoples, his family, his disciples, and yet the twist is that Mary, when she goes and visits the tomb, his body is there. And,
well, yeah. It's not in the original tomb.
It's not in the original tomb, yes. And this is where I'm getting to. It was not in the tomb that it was buried in. It ends up finding it in the family tomb.
Right.
And again, I don't want to spoil the book, because that's a huge part of the story in which you lead into later in the chapters. Does an empty tomb with Jesus being resurrected, is that important for you to believe in who Jesus was?
For me, resurrection takes on so many dimensions, and I am more compelled by the truth behind resurrection rather than the facts of resurrection. For me, the thing that Jesus did over and over and over again was point to God. So he was not pointing to himself and saying, now for my next trick, kind of thing. He was, and that's what made him different from all the other miracle workers and prophets and things who were around at the time, who were looking for personal gain or notoriety. He was always pointing away from himself and toward God. So to me, this idea of resurrection, whether it's the transcendent victory of love over the collective sum total of humanity's evils, whether it's a bodily resurrection, where it's some sort of existential, mystical resurrection, this question remains the same, which is, where does this point, and how does it point to God? And so for me, that is the more interesting question. So it doesn't feel particularly controversial to me to have Jesus' physical body left behind, even though it kind of teleports around. That's not problematic for my faith, even if that actually did happen, even if there was no physical resurrection, it's not necessary for my faith. And I should point out that of the controversies that have been brought up in the book, the character Jacob, who is actually the clone of Jesus, the all of the complaints so far or concerns expressed so far have been about the fact that Jacob swears, has premarital sex, and drinks, and no one has actually mentioned yet, except for you, that Jesus' physical body reappears in a family tomb. So go figure that one.
Well, because I have no problems with the fact that Jesus probably had sex, whether it was premarital or not, and he probably sweared like a sailor. That just doesn't bother me at all.
Right, yeah.
In fact, in the opening of this video, I state the fact that I answer my own question, do I think Jesus was married? And yeah, I do. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. Somebody asked me a long time ago, well, doesn't that change the story for you? Not really. In fact, it makes it that much more sweet. If he was married, if he did have children, and he still chose to do the things that he did,
Right.
that makes it even that much more powerful to me. That still doesn't take away the fact that I truly, in the narrative that I find myself in, that Jesus is Lord.
Sure. Well, and if you consider the fact that it would have been strange for someone who was actually referred to over and over again as rabbi to be called that, who was unmarried, then I think that we need to be at least open to that possibility.
Well, yeah, because that would be, a lot of people don't want to take the time and go back and have a historical look. We like to take our 21st century lenses and put them upon stories that happened over 2,000 years ago, and
Right.
it would have been weirder or more unlikely for him not to be married than he would have been married.
Right.
Just because it doesn't mention that he shits and pees in the scripture doesn't mean that he didn't do it.
He doesn't. Right. Yeah.
And just
Exactly.
because it doesn't mention the fact that he was married doesn't mean that he wasn't.
That's right. That's right.
And
I think the absence of that speaks more to our perspective and our relative discomfort with sex than it does anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, and especially, like you said, the clone of Jesus, Jacob, yeah, he's a normal 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid who loves music, loves women, loves life, and he is just trying to make it in the world. That's what I absolutely love, probably the most about this book out of any of the conspiracy theories, is because Jacob embodies the humanity of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think one of the reasons that I made Jacob the age he is in the book, aside from the fact he needed to be out on his own, is this novel is actually set up potentially for a trilogy, and over time. He doesn't really, in this book, he only starts to begin to come to terms with who he is and what that means. And I like to think that during those missing years, the teenage and 20s years for Jesus, he was going through much of the same thing. I'm guessing there were times when he was tempted to use his anointedness, his enlightenment, his power, what have you, in ways that were self-serving, and maybe he even did, or that he would wrestle with his humanity and divinity and the coexistence of those two things. And so I wanted to leave time to do the very same thing with Jacob throughout this series, because I think that's the most interesting stuff, when it comes to the story of Jesus.
I recently got in a conversation on Facebook, of all places, about the book of Barnabas, and there's a new article out there about the Epistle of Barnabas, and those of us who've gone to seminary know it's been around for a long time. It's nothing new. They validated it in the late 1800s as an authentic epistle that did not make it into our canon. But for folks who have not had the historical training that, say, you and I have had through seminary and just through having mentors, I find it difficult for folks to digest a plausible different story than what is taught from the pulpit. Mm-hmm. And that saddens me. And that's what makes me extremely, again, excited about this conversation, that this story that you've presented, that it really makes people call into question what faith looks like, what does Jesus look like, and not everything that is spoke from the pulpit should be taken at face value.
Right. Yeah, and much like some of the other books I've done, the Banned Questions series, the Post-Christian book that's coming out in August, I try to raise and evoke more questions and just thought and discussion than answers, because I think one of the things that has really held up Christianity for the worst in the last 60 years is our idolatry of certainty and our desperate and single-minded pursuit of answers. And then the defense of those answers, because that's at the heart of Christendom. And I think in order to liberate Christianity from the grips, the violence and the imperialism of Christendom, we have to let go of our idolatry of certainty, and we have to wrestle more with those questions and consider what Tony Jones calls epistemic humility when we're approaching the stories of Scripture. Or what John Caputo says is live in the perhaps rather than in the, having to settle on a yes or no.
With your choice of the Essenes.
Mm-hmm.
And give folks just a brief history of who they were within the larger context of within the Christian story, or within the Jewish story, I should say.
Well, they were ascetics. They were set aside. They were mystics. Mm-hmm. And they were not necessarily considered legitimate Jews by some people.
Yeah.
And so they were considered sort of a heretical group, which was all the more attractive to me in considering this idea that maybe Jesus and then even Mary and some of Jesus' family subsequently spent some time with these folks, and that maybe some of his living into his godhood came from this mystical group, and not necessarily from the stories that are just in Scripture, from the teachings in the temple and from his experience with the Pharisees and things like this, but that that mysticism played a strong part in Jesus' spiritual formation and identity. That's something that I relate to, so maybe there's some ego involved there, but I would love to see a reclamation of Christian mysticism within our spiritual identity and practice. And so I kind of wanted to put the Essenes forward as a bit of an example of that.
Well, and it's also helpful to note that they also believed in a two-pronged Messiah, one of a spiritual sense and one of an almost a military sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that plays very well into this story as well, why they would want to see somebody who come to rescue them spiritually and physically.
Mm-hmm.
Because also, for those folks that don't know, Qumran is not also very far from Masada, which is also a big part of the Jewish tradition. It was the last big revolt, and the Romans sieged this place, for 3 years before there was a mass suicide, almost like the ancient Jonestown. Us being disciples, pastors, we know all about the Kool-Aid. So they got to see a lot of not only through the time that they spent in meditation and prayer, but also seeing the longing for an actual physical liberation from an oppressor.
Right.
As well, especially with Masada being right next door, literally, to that. And so I find that fascinating as well. Tell me, favorite character in the whole book so far for you? And Jesus doesn't count.
Sure. Well, Jesus is such a minor character, really, in the whole thing. I guess I identify most with Nika, who is the religion reporter from the New Yorker. I think she's a smart character. She has integrity, though is also willing to bend the rules when she needs to. She's industrious and tireless in her pursuit of truth. She's skeptical but open. So there are a lot of components of myself in her, I think. But I really love Scratch, the priest who is Jacob's mentor. Although he takes a few twists and turns in the story as well.
Yes, he does.
So my hope is that what you see on the surface with Scratch is not entirely what you end up getting.
What is your main hope outside of just getting the story out of you and onto paper that you want to see accomplished with this novel or trilogy if there's more to come?
Well, part of it was just seeing if I could do this this quality of publishing on my own anyway. Basically, I work with a literary agent, Kathy Helmers, who represents my nonfiction work. And I've asked her about this book. I've been working on it, like I said, for almost 7 years now, off and on. And she said, we can't really represent your fiction right now because you're still kind of emerging as, your nonfiction voice in the mainstream and everything. So, but you could self-publish it if you want. And I decided, if I'm going to do that, I don't want it to look and feel self-published. I want it to be of the same quality, have the same characteristics and markers that I would look for in any major publishing house book. So I started building a budget for all the pieces that they would do for a title, and it ended up being around $12,000. And so I thought, well, I've seen a few people like Andra Moran did her CD this way. Bruce Reyes Chow did his last book this way. And I thought, okay, if I can crowdfund this, then that shows that there's an interest and a desire for this book to be out there. And then I'll get to learn the whole publishing process beginning to end. So, long story short, that we did succeed with that, and I've gone through all those steps, learned a ton along the way, what to do, what not to do in publishing. And so that is very gratifying, and more so even than some of my other titles where I've handed those pieces off to other folks. I've seen this from beginning to end, and like now when people order the book through my website, it comes to my email account, and I actually package the book and go take it to the post office and mail it myself. I would love for that to become an economy of scale, an issue of scale that I can't keep up with, and I need help. That'd be great. But really, just knowing that the book is out there and I've had people get excited about it and are talking about it, and I had a couple of other authors say, man, I wish I had thought of that idea. That's very gratifying for me. So I feel like I've achieved a lot of what I wanted. Now it's just a matter of getting it in more hands, and getting it seen by more eyes.
Well, you realize the story was kind of written already once before. Did you know this?
There's Michael Crichton, of course, who did Jurassic Park, and then...
Oh, no, I'm thinking of a lot lesser. I'm thinking of Superman and Superboy. There's a storyline where Superman's DNA was taken from him, and then they created Superboy. Well, and there was a similar episode way back when in the old Star Trek, too, I believe. Oh, yeah. There was sort of a messiah figure in the Klingon culture that was cloned.
So yeah,
We're
it's a
showing our age right now.
I know. These are popular culture memes, and so it is, in true Christian Piatt fashion, I guess. I'm colliding science and religion. I'm causing them to converge in an interesting way, and I love to take secular and sacred and converge them in interesting and creative ways as well. That's kind of where I live my life, is in that space in between all those. So. Yeah, it's not surprising that there is no Bizarro world, though, in this book. Maybe in the second book I'll have a Bizarro Jesus. So.
Bizarro Jesus.
Yeah.
You know what I like to call those spaces in between the sacred and what people deem the secular? I put it in terms like this. People either like to choose to live in the black and white or the gray, and neither one of those options are... I think healthy, at least for me. I want to know what it looks like to live life in color, and in finding that different option. And I think the boundaries that you are pushing in a novel, and especially this novel, that we get to explore those questions of what does it mean to live in color by asking the simple question, what if?
Right.
What if? And everybody will hear more about this later from me, but I think what if are the two most dangerous words that the Christian church has ever faced. And I love it done in a story format that is entertaining. I mean, the first day, I think I read 10 or 12 chapters like it was nothing. It is an easy read. That's not a critique on your writing, but that is because it drew me in that quickly. And it started out as a 110,000 word book, and we pared it down with the help of Frank Schaeffer and some other folks to a very lean and mean 45,000 words on purpose, because we wanted it to move like a freight train. And so I'm glad to hear, that it draws you in, and it is one of those that hopefully you don't want to put down. No, absolutely not. And I'm excited to tell other people about this. Obviously, this is why when Patheos asked me to write a review on this or do an interview or video on this, I thought of you because A, you're the author, and B, why not go directly to the source and ask some fundamental questions of what drove you to create this. Two final questions, and I'll let you be. What has been the number one surprise out of this book for yourself? And the second question is what has been the biggest critique that you've had about this from yourself?
So the biggest critique from other people, or that I would critique of my own approach to it?
Yes, to both. Why not?
Okay. The biggest surprise is probably just how many steps there are in the publishing process. A lot of people kind of think about it like turning on a light. You submit the manuscript and it magically comes out as a book. But there are so many steps that have to go into making a really quality book, which is why self-published stuff ends up looking self-published. And so it does make a case for a professional quality team to be assembled, whether it's on your own or with a major house. To do this. So that really did surprise me, and it definitely gave me some added respect for the editors, the acquisitions and managing editors I've worked with who have pushed these books through and made a real quality product out of them. As far as the critiques that I have received so far, probably the whole idea of extra biblical Jesus stories, and this idea that my Jacob, who embodies the genetic information, the genetic code of Jesus, and demonstrates some Messiah-like qualities unexpectedly, I guess, that I have him behave in ways that they deem unchristlike, because I delve into, as you mentioned, the deep humanity of what it means to be a teenager, and also wrestle with this idea of calling, power, potential, responsibility, accountability, all these kinds of things. As for myself and like as far as what I might do differently or do over again, so far I have found this just to be a very, very gratifying. I'm very proud of the team that we've put together to work on this. Karen Campbell, who is a publicist from Karen Campbell Media, has been doing a top-notch job in helping me with getting the word out to media groups. Bob Guillemette, who worked on Reza Aslan's book Zealot, is helping me possibly with the movie rights, which would be very exciting if it works out.
Are you there?
And then at Flying Fish has been helping me out as well with grassroots publicity and marketing and things like that. People have stepped up, all of these places, Pathos, Red Letter, Sojourners, and really offered me big discounts on getting the word out through their advertisements and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's really been a collective effort. I think it's probably taken a few years off of my life, but the good news, as Holly says, is I'll never know.
Well, now you've got my brain going. Who would you want to play roles if this gets to go to movies? Would you want to see play Jacob?
Oh, geez.
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus. Gosh, I have no idea. I have really become so intimately acquainted with these characters of my own invention in my mind that it's really hard for me to separate those imagined people and picture someone else who's real life. It would have to be someone of Middle Eastern descent. They would have to be kind of a bit of a slacker with some charisma, and would need to know how to skate and play the sax. So as long as you can find one of those, I'm probably pretty good with it.
That's awesome. And Nika, who would play Nika?
Oh, Nika, man. I kind of have a curious crush on Nika. Which, as I said that I identify so much of myself with her, that's a little creepy now that I said that.
You said that, not me.
I know. Gosh, I don't know. I'm so bad at remembering people's names. It would need to be someone in her 30s or 40s, kind of an Eastern Seaboard personality, a little bit of an edge, like an Aaron Brockovich who knows how to dress, probably like a Sandra Bullock kind of a person or something like that, I can imagine, because she's got that sort of intrepid personality going. So I'd be okay with that.
Well, Christian, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day. Thank you for writing this fun, amazing book. Blood Doctrine is the name of it. You can find it on Amazon. You can buy it on Kindle. You can buy a copy from christianpiatt.com. Where else could folks find you or be able to purchase the book?
Yeah, you can find anything about me, my blog, the podcast I do, Homebrewed Christianity Culture Cast, the new Angels Share podcast about all things brewed and distilled is now up on iTunes. So you can connect to all of that through christianpiatt.com. You can buy the book on iTunes, Barnes & Noble. You can order it through any store, but we've got all ebook and print versions and T-shirts available through the website, and of course, more of that stays in the family, so to speak, if you order directs from me. But happy to have people order it wherever they feel comfortable.
Well, thank you again, Christian, and again for being here on Outlaw Theology. And folks, feel free to leave Christian questions in the comment section below. Feel free to tweet him. Your Twitter handle is
Christian Piatt.
Yeah, you're like me. Got in Twitter in the very beginning, and
Yep.
you get your actual name.
That's right.
You can also find you on Facebook. Your fan page is Christian Piatt as well.
Christian Piatt, author.
Author,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes, brother. And thanks again for stirring the imaginations of us theological geeks and conspiracy nuts.
You bet, man. Happy to do it. And here's hoping this one does well enough that I can justify to my wife spending the time and energy on a second book.
Hear, hear. Take care, Christian.
Thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye.